This is Phil Upchurch to tell you a little bit more about the Upchurches. Today, let's talk about the most famous Upchurch of all, John Jordan Upchurch. I often say John Jordan Upchurch was the most famous Upchurch of all and nobody knows anything about him. That's not quite true, but the reason I say that is that if a family doesn't raise up their own famous people, they are soon forgotten in history. So let's tell the story. If we look back at the first 5 generations of the Upchurch family in America, we can plug in John Jordan Upchurch here under John Upchurch IV, who was head of the John Upchurch IV clan in America, he being living about the time of the Revolution. Now, John Jordan Upchurch had one child, a son named Ambrose Upchurch, and he had 4 children, one of which was John Jordan Upchurch. Now, the sad situation is that Ambrose was killed by a jealous brother-in-law in 1824, leaving 4 small children to be taken care of, including John Jordan Upchurch. Now, it so happened that Ambrose had married a fairly prominent lady by the name of Elizabeth Hill. We won't tell that story now, but it traces back to the famous Hill family in Franklin County, North Carolina, that were associated with some of the very early movements of the Methodist ministry in America. That's another story for another day. John Jordan Upchurch then was underprivileged, grew up in a household that did not have many resources, and he soon, as a young man, moved to Raleigh, North Carolina, where he began to educate himself, and there he married Angelina Ziegenfuss Green from Pennsylvania. He was active in Raleigh in educating himself and operating various businesses, but before the Civil War he moved north to Pennsylvania where his wife's people lived. And he continued to educate himself and to be very successful in the railroad business, running railroads and being a mechanic on the railroad. He was self-taught all the way. Well, during the Civil War, when the Union struck the railroads, the government took over the railroads and they asked John Jordan Upchurch to run the railroad, which he did. But after the railroad, after the event was over, the Civil War was over, in 1868, John Jordan Upchurch had enough moxie that he created what is called the Ancient Order of United Workmen. Now, this is a fraternal benefit society. And within a very short period of time, there were chapters in every state in the nation and in Canada, and it was called the Fraternal Benefit Society. He masterminded this organization and led it through its growth period. Later on, when he became the senior citizen, he traveled throughout the country to meet with various organizations of this society. And in fact, the story is told that when he got to California and he addressed the California Legislative Assembly, he was very well received. And in fact, later when he died in 1887, the California legislature adjourned out of his memory. Now, John Jordan Upchurch did write of his own story. I have a machine copy of his book, John Jordan Upchurch, the Father Upchurch, and this, of course, goes into the Upchurch archives, and he tells the story in very fine fashion. He was a very humble man. His philosophy was, in this fraternal benefit society, that management and labor should work together. And they should avoid strikes, and they should help one another. He was not all that successful in terms of stopping strikes and from the management standpoint, but the laborers really liked what he did, and that's why the organization grew so much. In fact, there is still a chapter in existence in Washington State, the Ancient Order of United Workmen, and there's a book been written entitled The Fogarty Years, which I have a copy of. I have to have it replaced because it got damaged with water and the pages are stuck together. This book is by Keith L. Yates, who knew about the Ancient Order of United Workmen. Now, early in writing the stories in the Upchurch Bulletin, I included in the 1980 edition, Volume 1, Number 4, the story about John Jordan Upchurch, and we have a picture of his monument, which actually is here in St. Louis, Missouri, where I live. Before he died, he was living in Steelville, Missouri. And I traveled down to Steelville, Missouri, which is sort of in the middle part of the state, and met with people there who knew his children. They didn't know John Jordan himself, but they knew several of his children, and I was able to identify grave sites in the area that related to him. But not only that, I was fortunate enough to know two of his grandchildren. In fact, one of his grandchildren who lived in Tucson at the time I did was the one who was responsible for me getting a copy of this, a machine copy of this book. I borrowed her copy and made a copy myself. Now, we have traced the family of John Jordan down through the years, and we know a lot about him. We won't have time to tell about that here, but I would relate about another encounter I had with a grandson of his. This grandson was what you might call an itinerant miner. He traveled around the country on his lonesome as a free soul, looking for places he could mine for gold. And one of the most enjoyable experiences I've had is when this son visited our home in Tucson, Arizona, maybe 20 years ago, and told us about his recollections of his grandfather. Now, I also had connections with other members of the family who shared with me generously their opinion of their father. The records that have been passed down to us reflect clearly that John Jordan Upchurch was a sterling performer. I will just read briefly from the Dictionary of American Biography, which tells about him, and it's entitled John Jordan Upchurch, founder of the Ancient Order of United Workmen. It goes on to tell a little bit about him and the fact that he moved on to north part of America. He says he moved in 1846 to Pennsylvania, where he entered the employ of the Mine Hill and Skull Hill Haven Railroad in 1851, becoming master mechanic. In June 1864, train hands seeking a raise went on strike, and for 2 weeks, according to his account, Upchurch operated the road in the interest of the government with men provided by the War Department. The strike was broken, and Upchurch determined to unite employers and employees in one grand organization opposed to trade unions. Now, the net result of this was, in the end, that these Ancient Order of United Workmen associations or societies did give benefits to the widows of anyone who died in the workforce. So this really translated into insurance companies. And in fact, the insurance company called the Pioneer Mutual Insurance Company of America is headquartered in Fargo, North Dakota. And I'm told that in their boardroom there hangs a picture of John Jordan Upchurch. I hope someday to go there and see that myself. In the meantime, I can tell you that the Pioneer Mutual Insurance Company was responsible for a grand monument being created in his honor in Bellefontaine Neighbors Cemetery here in St. Louis. There's a grand story in the newspapers when John Jordan died in 1887, and at some point I hope to take you to Bellefontaine Neighbors Cemetery and show you some of the sites there, as well as to report to you on what the newspapers had to say about John Jordan Upchurch. I hope you've enjoyed learning a little bit about this famous Upchurch, the most famous Upchurch of all, and I hope you will tell this story to other Upchurch relatives you have, and that you will look into it more and learn about this wonderful individual. Thank you for paying attention.